We want to help you today as a parent of preteens and teens. If that's been a challenge for you as a parent, if you're in that spot where you're controlling too much and you know it, I don't have to have you answer that publicly. You'll know in your heart, right, Jessica? Mm-hmm. You just know, okay, that is me. This is going to be exceptionally helpful for you. Mm-hmm. And in the end, as Dr. Ken Wilgus will talk about, you're the beneficiary of this as a parent. It puts you in a much better place and your relationship with your teen in a much better place. Ken and Jessica, welcome back to Focus. Good to have you again.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's just start there. Where'd you come up with the title, Feeding the Mouth That Bites You?
Okay,
it's so succinct for teenagers.
That's a quote from an author that I've not read much of, Peter DeVries, who wrote a book and that included the phrase, sometimes parenting is nothing more than feeding the mouth that bites you.
Yeah. Wow.
And it's this phrase that all parents of teens just light up with. That's it. That's how I feel.
It's so funny because every time I've mentioned the title of that book to people, because Gene and I, we tell everybody, Gene's your greatest salesperson, let me tell you, but we mention it and they'll laugh and say, how do you come up with that? So anyway, that's perfect.
Steal your best stuff. That's what
Let me ask you, Dr. Ken, as a psychologist, what's the main struggle you hear from parents about their relationships with their teens?
The main struggle that kind of underlies lots of struggles is a control battle. And if you don't really know that, you'll think you're talking about whether this is the right outfit to wear, whether those are the right friends to hang with. But underneath that, almost all the time, is the hidden question, who are you to decide this? When will it be up to me to decide this? Why are you still telling me how to handle this?
Generally, what paint that picture, because again, parenting, I think parents need some slack because, you start with feeding and wiping the bottom and they're totally dependent upon you. Moms identify with that, right? Mm-hmm. And then, 3 to 5, they're developing a bit, but they're still dependent upon you to do so much. And then elementary school, and then of course, preteen, 11, 12, and then 13. There does become this battle, typically. And the thing about that, and what you're so good at reminding parents of, is this is actually a good thing.
Yeah, it exactly
is. It's not bad.
Exactly,
but why do we freak out as parents that somehow we're now losing control? And controlling a 15-year-old, that's not going to work very well.
Well, a really important thing that I learned early on, and I want to make sure parents know, is that we live in an unusual culture that does not have a standardized means of transitioning our children into adulthood. Because of that, you don't have to give teenagers everything they want, but they do need to know, am I on a track here where you will be out of my life and it will be up to me? And it's just an unusual time for the last, 120 years that we've not answered that question clearly.
Yeah.
And that creates a kind of panic in teenagers that's more than is needed because they feel like, I've got a lot of teenagers that tell me their parents are controlling everything, when in fact they're not actually controlling everything, but the teenager doesn't have a sense of, are you going to be leaving at some point? So you want to clarify that move,
Let me ask you this, you would see this because I'm sure your clientele is both faith-oriented and not faith-oriented.
Yeah.
Do we as Christians have are we more inclined toward control because of our belief system and our desire for the right outcomes?
Ironically, yeah.
Well, I don't think it's ironic, actually. I think it fits our faith in God and trying to do the best we can do. And if things are wobbly, we want to correct that, whether they're 13, 16, 25, maybe.
But here's where it's ironic, is that parents think that we're old-fashioned. We're the ones that really want to do God's will. And we hang on till they pry control out of our cold, dead hands. That's not old-fashioned. That's very new. Because in, 150 years ago, there wasn't, the word teenager was invented in 1942. There was no such thing as this 13 to 18-year-old. They were young adults out working. Girls were pregnant and, married and pregnant by 13, 14, 15. That was not unusual. So this idea of, we're the conservative ones that hang on till forever because that's God's will, that's not To me, that's what's ironic, is that from the Jewish culture at 13, there has always been a transition point. This is actually new parenting that says God wants me to hold on and make everything just fine, no matter what the age of my kid. No one thought that before.
And I think generally you would say, as a psychologist, seeing these clients, it's not healthy.
No, it makes it
more difficult.
Ironically, there are two outcomes. One that's bad is the rebellious teenager. But in the last 10 years, I've seen a new kind of that's not good, is the not rebellious teenager. The one that, and again, it's not all about rebellion, but the one that is being treated very disrespectfully, still patronized, but they don't even push back. And that is virtually always because of an anxiety disorder, something that's keeping them from that natural desire to, hey, I think it's time for me to handle stuff. And that's actually a little worse. So both of those are not good outcomes.
Difficult. The core content, I think, is that planned emancipation idea. Define what that means, planned emancipation. Jessica, I'm going to come to you in a second here with some examples.
Who has done it? Jessica did very well with it. So it's, a lot of parents know about, if my child, my 8-year-old, can handle something on their own, we encourage them, you go do that yourself and good job. Well, this is not that. What I talk about is that you correct this cultural problem by, in your home and in your church. I have a number of churches that are really steadfast on, at 13 here, you're not an old child, you're a young adult. And more you will see freedoms, not privilege. Privilege says, I'll let you try it, you're doing your homework yourself, but if it doesn't go well, we're going to take it back. The freedom is the recognition that all of our hassling and trying to control, make you keep the room clean, all these different things is working against itself. Mm-hmm. And we're going to recognize that at your age, in a steady, and it's planned because it's in steady doses, not all at once, but we are going to be moving out of your life. And you really want to be making a statement about it and be happy about it. A lot of parents are doing this. A lot of really good, passionate moms do it, but they struggle with that. I hate this, that doctor guy said we need to do this, but it like you said, it's a good thing, and you really want to announce pretty much that at 13, there will be a few things that we no longer demand that you answer to us about, and then we will be done, and for all of our listeners virtually, by the end of high school. It doesn't mean we don't have influence. Ironically, it means you'll have a lot more influence, but we will be out of the forced control business in your life in just a few years.
And what's ironic about it is most parents would say, oh, that's the way, but they just don't know the path to get there.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Jessica, you're the mom of the 20-something young adults and the younger teens. Yes. You applied this. How did you apply that emancipation principle, and did it work in your family?
Yes. Well, I think, there's a process that you go through where you take simple things like keeping your room clean for a younger teenager, and you say, okay, you know what? I'm no longer requiring that you keep your room clean. Now, I have to say, Dr. Ken, this is one thing that we have joked about that I have a really hard time agreeing with this one. But you know what? I'll use an example I can agree with, and that's music. So
we want the one you don't agree with, too. Come on. Let's check them all off
I
here.
like a tidy house. It's really hard for me to let go of the room.
Yeah.
But
it sounds like a control issue.
And her kids are great. So,
but go ahead. Just cover the cleaning room, because that's a lot of parents are stuck there. Yes. And then we'll get to the thing that worked well for you.
Because it's a sign of godliness.
It is. I really feel like
what scripture reference is that?
Verse.
So Dr. Ken suggests that when you have a young teenager, you say, hey, you know what? You get to keep your room the way that you like it, because you're not going to die from a dirty room. That's an easy thing to give up, right? So if you give up that control and say, it's your job now to take care of your room, I'm also not going to be doing your laundry anymore, because you wouldn't want your mother coming into your room and digging around to find your dirty laundry or sorting through your things anymore. But it's also up to you to make sure that you have your things ready for school, that you're not behind on, getting somewhere because you can't find your cleats or whatever you need for the next activity.
So before we move from that example, it's obvious you struggled with that. So how did you overcome your need of control for the need of transference to that child to control their own bedroom, even when it was dirtier than you would be comfortable with?
Absolutely. Well, a lot of it is just realizing this is a long-term game I'm looking at.
Okay.
I'm sitting here with a 13-year-old saying, hey, take care of your room. I want to know by the time they're 18 that they can manage their life well. They can find the things they need before they leave the house, and they know because they've had a series of hard knocks and had a few times where it didn't turn out so well, that they can learn these lessons when they're in my home.
Right.
There's a point you realize that your child, your young adult, is going to end up being out of the house at some point, and you have a timeline ticking. You've got to get that under control,
That's
and you've got
exactly
to
right.
have this idea that it doesn't matter whether I want to let this go or not. It's going to be out of my control at some point. And so this is a good time to pass that on to them. And progressively, things get more complicated. You start letting go of things that are more valuable to you. Maybe it's the friends that they hang out with, or the boy or girl that they begin to date. That you don't say a lot about that. You have conversations about it, but you cannot control it. And you realize it's out of your control.
I would think the high control parent, Ken, and I'm just imagining you sitting in the counseling session, and the parent's going, of course I need to be involved in that choice of who he or she, my son or daughter, dates. I mean, you'd have to be a ostrich, Dr.
Right.
Ken. I'd be putting my head in the sand.
seems foolish.
I'm trying to protect my child.
That's right.
Ken, are you crazy?
Right.
Speak to that.
Well, most of the
fear.
time, that's what that sounds like.
Yep.
It sounds like the more passionate, the more knowledgeable. It's actually the more fearful parent.
Yeah.
And and again, I live and breathe fear, but we should try to push back on it and not sort of be proud of it. And we talk about this on the podcast rather a lot, that now more than ever, Christian families cannot afford to raise kind of weak, passive, obedient, I go to church because my parents make me, even if I'm 19 or 20, because the world is a place that is darker and darker, and we need young adults that have had the experience of making their own choices about things. Even if our parents don't agree with us, we still need to know from parents, do you know that it's my time to make these choices, so that they are ready, like Jessica was saying, they're ready because they need to be going on into their life.
Let's talk about some of those boundaries that you outline in the book, just to help parents get a picture of what we're talking about, the healthy boundaries that need to be there.
Yes.
What would be 2 or 3 examples of those?
So there's 2 kinds of boundaries. The first one thing we talk about is a freedoms list, and Jessica mentioned that with freedom always comes responsibility. So if you have the freedom to keep your room clean, your room is attached to my house, so you can't keep food there, there'll be a fine, you'll be doing your own laundry, those sort of things. Freedom to listen to your own music, which parents need to know a teenager is going to listen to the music they want to.
With or without your permission.
Well, absolutely. So your control over that gets weaker. But by announcing, you know what, that's between you and God. However, if I catch your little sister listening to it, you're going to lose your phone for a day. You need to be, so there's still responsibilities where that freedom doesn't spill out onto us.
Oh, that's good. I like that. One of the things that it seems more rampant in the culture today is this entitlement issue.
Oh, yes.
It's probably because we're rather successful as a culture. There's abundance for most things.
I think that's right.
We don't live in a kind of a resource-starved environment. And with our children, it becomes easy that everything is right there. We go to baseball games and football games and concerts, and their life seems pretty easy, right? And how do we combat that entitlement mentality, especially with our Christian children?
Well, I think with children, under teenage years, Jessica and I have talked a lot about, you're careful about how it's hard now to not have kids have just everything they want. And so that's a different battle. But for adolescents, that changes a bit to more of expecting them to handle things themselves, to make their own purchases, make their own money, more and more freedom. Because the real kind of entitlement that you give to teenagers is where you will take care of everything for them, not expect them to manage anything themselves, and even constantly talk about how do they feel about this thing, as if that's the critical factor.
Yeah.
It turns out to be disrespectful. It's how you would talk to a child, but not how you would talk to a responsible adult.
In that regard, I would think, again, one of the difficulties we have as Christian parents, not just Christian moms, but moms and dads, because I'm guilty of this too. A bit of our identity is in taking care of these children that
That's right.
God has given us. So when we're overdoing that, we might feel good about it. We might find a little bit of identity in that we're so good at taking care of our family, there's no needs here. That's not a healthy perspective.
No, and it's a common struggle for moms. I mean, I think that's something that you've
For sure.
Dealt with.
I tend to overparent. I mean, that's probably one of my biggest struggles is,
How do you pull that back?
well, I think a lot of times I think that, I've given my kids a rule or, some sort of consequence to something that they've done, but instead of allowing them to suffer that consequence, I'm going to keep nagging so they can avoid it, or I'm going to protect them against that consequence or lighten that consequence just because they don't like it. It pains them. It pains me to see them go through it. But actually, I've just handed my kids a lot of entitlement. I've just handed my kids an opportunity to shirk the responsibility and the consequence they should have served.
But I think that for most nurturing moms, the recommendation, again, by adolescents, not for children, to pull back and leave that to them feels like unloving.
It does.
Right,
It
exactly.
does. I really want to protect them from any pain, you know?
Yeah.
And that's not healthy. They need to experience hardship. They need to experience pain from their decisions and their consequences of their actions.
Yeah, that's so good. Dr. Ken, what age is appropriate to start that planned emancipation process?
I like 13.
And 13. And what are the first few steps getting there? Just so the parents can take a taste of this.
There's usually two things. We'll get questions about how do I start this? And then the most common one is, oh, we're too late. We didn't start this. What do we do now? And you can do both. So I really like 13. If you get a chance to go to a bar mitzvah, it is lovely. It is really cool. But I've had numerous clients who I went to their bar mitzvah, but I knew they went home to the same kind of childish expectations, and so it didn't carry the same weight that the ceremony does. So if you do something, I think, I live in Texas. We don't have bar mitzvah, but we do have barbecue. We took my son with his grandfathers and uncle and cousin and just a bunch of men and met at this barbecue restaurant. They'd each written a letter. There's some really good resources. I think Focus has that about how, kind of as a signal. But the more important thing, the signal is you're now a young adult and you come home to some changes. So in my house, the nutty professor that I am, it was you no longer have to answer to us about your music. You no longer have to answer to us about your room with these caveats, and these are now up to you. So that's, I think, the ideal way is roughly at 13 years old. The key is to make an announcement that in this house you are now a young adult, not an old child, and keep looking for ways to say that. Yeah. If your kid is now 16, 17, sometimes even later, it's never too late to, my favorite thing is that they'll tell parents, look, why don't you just go home and say, there's this shrink dude who thinks that when we're trying to help you, it feels to you like we think you're a child. Yeah. And we want to change that because we do see you as a young adult. And we're going to try to make sure that's more clear in the way that we talk to you and the restrictions that we have.
I'm hearing very clearly you announce this at the appropriate time. 13 is a good time to start, and then you're following that through until they leave the home for various things.
Yep.
Jessica, how'd that work for you?
Well, my kids appreciate the freedoms. They're excited about it, right?
So they
like me.
Yes, they do. Well, yeah, mostly.
We're talking mom down off the roof.
Mostly. I think the thing is they realize, I'm going to be getting some freedoms, but they also realize that their older siblings, especially, they can see, when I get to this age, I get this. This happens in our house. And to have those sort of milestones that they can look forward to is helpful to know that by the time I leave this house, I'll have all the freedoms to me as an adult. I'll be able to do whatever I want. And there's no way that mom and dad are going to try and take those things back.
Yeah.
So
the benefit of the contradictory belief is critical. And what I mean by that is everything we've said, that my inclination as a parent is overprotect, overprovide, always have an escape plan for the child, etc. And that just comes so naturally. It's probably a very fleshly thing for us to do, not realizing the wisdom of allowing a little bit of difficulty and suffering, and that sounds very contrary. Mm-hmm. But how in the end, we've talked all session here about how that benefits the child. How does it benefit the parent?
Well, one, it makes your life a little bit easier when they are of 18. When they turn 18 and they've experienced these things at home, then when they go off to college, you're not so worried about it.
So you've seen that. You've got 23, 24-year-old.
I have a 20-year-old and a 23-year-old.
Okay.
And I am so happy to announce that my 23-year-old is completely financially responsible for himself.
Yes.
He's off my payroll.
Yes. How do I get this book?
And I'm so proud of him. He's a great guy. He's doing great things with his life. And so I do see that these steps to freedom have allowed him to grow the way and mature the way he should. And same with my daughter who's 20. She's in college, but she is definitely independent. She knows that mom and dad are going to say, you're an adult, you get to make these decisions now.
Yeah. And I think it's so good. Ken, I'm thinking of the parent listening right now, and they've got a junior, senior, maybe 17, maybe 18, still in the home. They're not off to college or vocational training or whatever they're going to go do. Is it too late?
Yeah, I think it's never too late. And I've literally, sometimes these control battles are still going on with a 20-something-year-old that is not even at home, because you've just, a lot of planned emancipation is really more of just a continual announcement that you are an adult. It's not a specific math formula of you better do these things at this point. So the announcement, the kind of recognition that we see you as an adult is never too late, and it can be powerful, especially since the power of that, of letting go, is the impact that you can have in communication, that sometimes parents have never even had that in their own relationship with their parents.
I think very few
it's pretty
something
common
like this.
Because this problem's been going on for 3 generations. We're used to thinking that being a parent is, oh, great, mom's going to come over, she's going to tell us how we're not doing this and this and this. Again, that did not used to happen like that. It's a new thing that we feel like we must always parent our adult children even as if they're children. So it's never too late to make that
I would say
announcement.
our experience with Trent was really exceptional, because we talked with you about where we were at and some of the difficulties we were having. You made some recommendations on giving certain control back to him. I mean, some things that kind of took our breath away, like being 18 and deciding whether he needs to come to church every Sunday. That's a big one. Mm-hmm. And I remember Gene and I both going, I don't know about that, right? Mm-hmm. But it was within a few days after that emancipation, if I could call it that Trent turned emotionally back toward us. It was no longer a fight. He didn't have to wake up every day thinking, what am I going to tell him?
And didn't that emancipation kind of make sense to you?
Oh, totally.
I think it makes, as fathers, it tends to make, we've not had these children in us. It's much easier for us to kind of think about that he's got to do it himself.
Well, and man, the gold star goes to Jane, because she did make that transition in a matter of weeks. I mean, it was like, okay, let's try it. And then boom, it happened so
and
beautifully.
She's a nurturing mom. It went against instinct.
Yeah.
Same thing for Jessica.
So it was a beautiful example, and their relationship is so amazing now. It's cool. Unbelievable. Yeah. They'll sit and talk for 3-4 hours. Let me ask you in that regard, that bigger goal of the idea of at 18, you want that young adult to be able to move out and stand on their own 2 feet or whatever.
Really at the end of high school. Yeah.
Yeah. The end of high school. Why are we not thinking that way? Why are we thinking to treat them like a child up until the point when we kiss them goodbye to go to college or out the door?
It's really a cultural shift since the Industrial Revolution.
So relatively new.
Relatively new. 13-year-olds used to be pretty much ready to go out in the fields with the men and do work, and kind of you could begin to establish a household a couple hundred years ago. Well, now that there's much more training needed. And so it wasn't really until after World War II that I think as Americans we snapped adolescence onto the end of childhood instead of where it should be, which is on the beginning of adulthood.
Yeah.
So it's been going on for a long time. And a lot of the parents that are doing this and seeing the advantages, they never fully saw it themselves because their parents, good people, but they never signaled to me, listen, don't ask me that. That's up to you. So it can feel kind of odd.
So this area of communication, I'm kind of chuckling because you have counseled thousands of parents and their teens. They're sitting in front of you in your office. You must have some hilarious stories about how blind we can become. Maybe give us an example of a couple of those where you're going, okay, this is going to be fun.
So I remember not that long ago, some parents that came to see me because of their teenager, but they just by the way mentioned that their 20-something-year-old daughter was going to have a wedding in just a couple of weeks. And they weren't going to go because they had not approved of this boy, who was, I think, a Christian, but not the right kind of, I don't remember what it was. But they just mentioned that as a toss-off, that, we're not in favor of this, so we're not going to go. And I asked them, well, what is your goal? What do you hope to accomplish? And then I said, look, let me tell you what's going to happen. You are currently on a raft way, way off in your daughter's distant horizon, giving some sort of advice that she's not listening to, and you're about to drop off the end of the horizon as far as any kind of influence over her life because of this very weak control thing of that is, I guess, ancient. I don't know. I know that when my sons-in-law asked me to marry my daughters, the first thing I said was, I really appreciate you asking, because I know that if my daughter is in love, if you're who she wants to marry, it's about signaling where your control is. So I have to often kind of talk to parents that get kind of stuck in a kind of control battle that's sort of gotten out of hand. And my goal is not that they need to be nicer or not nice. It's you're losing your impact on your adult children.
It's hard to understand that formula in the moment because, again, we try to control that outcome. I was playing golf with a guy not long ago, and he misses the green on the approach shot. And he goes, that's a son-in-law shot. I went, what's a son-in-law shot? He goes, well, it's close, but not what I was hoping for. That's a comical expression of what you're talking about. But I mean, so often, you are relinquishing this decision-making process. And again, they're going to live with those consequences. But that key to communication and keeping communication, that's something I fully believe in. Do we do that at all costs? I mean, even if our kids are away from the Lord and in their 20s and now they're not doing church and they're not so sure that that's, that the Lord is for them, whatever those conversations sound like, how in that kind of really raw spot, how do we maintain that,
I think
relationship and communication?
By signaling this is up, more and more is up to you. What parents often don't realize is that is really very often a key to being more effective. Because parents can get into a point when you haven't said anything about adulthood, you can't really say good morning without the teenager saying, no, it's not. And everything is, and so you feel like you have to bite your tongue and you can't ever say anything. Well, for example, take friends, as Jessica mentioned, I don't like your friend. But if you start by saying, look, I already told you you're 16. Your choice of friends is up to you. Any trouble you get into with that friend is your problem. But so it's your deal. But let me just mention to you, and that gives you much more freedom to be able to say, for me, I just think that since those guys never seem to remember to come get you, and I would feel kind of left out. Things that is advice and heard as advice is much more effective than having to almost bite your tongue off because, everything I say is you're just going to get, bent out of shape over it.
Let's move from communication to school. Parents have a variety of experience with their teens in school. It can be really good, and you have your honor student, and you'll buy the bumper sticker, put it on your car, and the rest of us look at it and go, what? Or the struggler. They're distracted by something or many things, friends, social activities, those kinds of things. Describe that environment of school and the impact on the parenting demand.
Well, in the culture that I work with, most all the parents I work with school is a huge deal.
Because you want them to achieve.
Well, and of course, that school isn't the magic path to everything. Certainly doing okay in school. I remember years ago there was an article that said, whatever happened to the C student? There's no C student. My student needs some special ed something and bump them up to A's. So it's the important part is that it can create a kind of cloud over a family's life from September to June. And a
lot of battles occur.
A lot of battles.
Yeah.
So one of the early things that parents can consider giving over is the freedom to manage school however you want. But here are the points when we're going to check your grades. And if the grades are not at the minimal expectation, there will be consequences. But then you can stop all of the, what are you doing this weekend? Did you study? Did you tell me because as you know, if you spend time with teenagers who don't know anything, for example, about algebra, they still know that you don't need to be telling me about algebra. Like it doesn't, you wait for well, he failed, so then he'll realize that he needs my help. They do not. It's still, control is that big a deal that I don't want you to take over this. So by letting go of the control of how you do it does not mean that you're letting go of expectations with school. And that gets back to you didn't make the minimum grade. Yeah, but it was 1 point away. Yeah, that's 1 point you didn't make, and so here's the consequence for it. So you want to be pretty consistent about that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you can immediately drop all of that argument all that stuff because it is now up to them.
Jessica, let me aim this to you, and then Ken, you can fill in some of the blanks. But managing money. I mean, this is a big one with teens, in terms of, well, get a job. Mm-hmm. Or they do stuff around the house and you're paying them, chore money, basically. How did you manage the money discussion with your teens? And was it successful or full of strife?
Well, I think we've done things differently with each kid because we've learned a few lessons along the way.
That's great.
Right?
Yeah.
With 4 kids, you start with one kid and you think, this doesn't work.
That poor firstborn.
They are suffering consequences of our poor parenting. But I would say that the thing that we really realized was that, for managing money, the simplest thing is for us to give them a lump sum, each week, and it covers a few things, but it doesn't cover everything because we want our kids to have some skin in the game, right?
Have to.
So we may give them enough money for gas to get to and from school, but we're not giving them enough money to head out with their friends every weekend or go to the movies, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and that works. Ken, what would you add for the parents that are struggling in that area? Especially the more affluent you are, typically the bigger the weekly stipend might be.
That's right. Well, what I like about that question is because it's well known that Jessica and her husband did a really good job of the finance stuff. And we're as happy with the outcome of our kids as she's with hers.
That's
but
good.
My wife and I were not as good about that. So we'd be kind of on it for a while and then kind of had let it lapse and so forth. So again, it's not math, but I think the key is what Jessica said about it's respectful to make sure that your kid has skin in the game. I do remember one of our daughters was at a late point in her dance career that I don't think that was going to be her future, and yet she still needed to go to these expensive things. And we really kind of agonized for back and forth until we finally said, you know what, if this is important, then we'll pay half. And all of a sudden, I think almost all of them just weren't that important anymore. If she had to pay the other half, and again, it's respectful to her. It's not teaching an important thing. It's just remembering that, you're a young adult. You need to make your own decisions about these things.
Let's move to screen time. This is probably one of the biggest inquiries that we receive here at Focus on the Family. Mm-hmm. How do I control my kids' screen time? And I mean, this starts young. It could be 8 years old, 5 years old, but certainly by 13, if there's a lack of boundaries around that, parents are totally frustrated. It's out of control, and I don't know what to do about it. So, Jessica, let me turn to you and say, how do you help me control this screen time?
Well, I would say that screen time and devices are about 80% of my parenting. I think it's totally different than the parenting that my parents were doing with me, where I didn't have that much access to screen time. So I would say parents today are really struggling with how much and what is right. And we're finding so much out as we go, which is really hard as a parent to realize your kid is a guinea pig in this whole system. We don't know how these devices are going to affect our kids long term, but we do know that they're not good. So how do we manage that? Well, I think the first thing is that you realize how old your kid is. Are we talking about a 13-year-old? Or are we talking about a 17-year-old? So what are the rules around a 13-year-old? And I think in my family, we've set rules about where the screen time happens. It happens in public places. It doesn't happen upstairs. It doesn't happen in a bedroom or a bathroom situation. It always happens in public places. And then we also, fortunately, now have a lot of controls on their devices that we place on their devices or on our home Wi-Fi that keeps things managed. But my 17-year-old, what are the rules around that? Well, she's about to leave, right? So how do I manage that? There's a lot more freedom that she's given there. Graduation day, you get to finally take your devices upstairs to your bedroom.
Oh, okay.
We don't have screens in the bedroom before that. But when you're 18, you're an adult. What do you get to do? You're going to have that freedom when you graduate from high school. We leave it till the end of school, so we make sure that they're graduating.
Right. No, that's good because I think this is the battle. You're right. 80. I mean, that's a shocking statement. 80% of your parenting is.
It takes a lot of my time.
Phone and screen time stuff. Probably the best advice that I heard here at in the broadcast from a screen expert was delay that decision for a smartphone as long as you can.
Yes.
And that really worked for Jean and I because I think Trent got his first smartphone at 17 and Troy was 15 because that's their age differentiation. And so that's what we chose to do. But whenever they would say, all our friends have the phone, and we'd say, oh yeah, let me talk to mom about that. And I'd let 6 months go by. And then finally they'd realize Dad never got back to us on this. Where's that phone thing at, Dad? Oh, yeah, man, let me talk to Gene about that, our mom about that, right? So, eventually we just said we're not going to do that until you're older. And I think that worked really well for us. They had I guess what you call a dumb phone that they could put in their car when they first started driving, but it didn't give them GPS or anything. So,
but I think it's real important for parents to know that in these last 10 years, we've lived through a huge upheaval that no one really knew. In 2007, when the iPhone was released, by 2009, there's just lots of data. If you read The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, there's enough data now that you're hearing about Meta, which I think is the Facebook company, and all. They're starting to roll out controls that they did not do before because it hurt them financially, because of the data that this is not good for our kids. The recommendation now is no smartphone really until your freshman year, and no social media till 16. Well, that's a very, very hard line to draw.
Yeah.
And if your kids have no sense of that, if they basically think everything my parents are telling me is kid stuff, then the last kid I saw who's lost his phone for a month had 4 devices from friends that he could get on. So to be effective with that, you really have to both push look, you're growing up here, you're more of an adult, while you clarify the message that this stuff is bad for all of us. And really, all of us should rethink our phones and so forth.
Yeah.
But that's why, to be effective, you have to be signaling this isn't us treating you like a child, it's you as an adult.
In that context, Ken, those conversations with your 15, 16, 17-year-old, where the discussion can be a little more mature, obviously, than a 13, 14-year-old. But in that context, the whole key is how to teach them to be responsible for those decisions that they're going to make. I think you should start as a parent realizing that you're not going to be able to keep it all out. Your kids will find a workaround through other friends, they will get to content they want to get to. That was my conclusion. So the bigger issue is, how do you teach them the harm of those things to help them to produce a better decision in their lives? That's the victory.
And for a teenager to teach that, you have to first answer the hidden question, why are you still telling me how to handle this?
Right.
And when will you say it's up to me? You answer that first. And then you can say, and there's lots now to be able to say, we don't like that we're pulling back on this. We wish you could have that freedom, and you will have that freedom. But we're actually going to hold off because, and again, you can be supported by reams of data. It's just wrecking.
Well, and to your point, Jessica, it's overwhelming. And it's one of the good things that we do here is Plugged In, which is really to provide insight for parents and teens too, about movies, about games, about all kinds of things that is in that social media space. And so I'd encourage you to check out Plugged In here at Focus on the Family, and the website will have that. You can always look for it, call us. But I think, as you said, this is such a big battle. I think with boys, I don't know that this is true with girls, Jessica. You can help me better understand that. But, gaming is a big issue, and a lot of the addictions occur in that space. How do you control those things, Ken?
Well, the most common, it's harder to predict exactly or to see the consequences for boys, because gaming and pornography is more harmful for them. For girls, it's social media, and that it's very clear tracking that. So for boys in games, I think it's similar in that you have to, as parents, be kind to yourself. You wake up after the end of the summer and you're like, he's playing this all the time. Well, just step back in and go, look, really sorry about this, but we got to redraw the lines again. Always saying at what point you will no longer draw the lines. But yeah, you do need to go back to being pretty clear about really the amount of time. For older teenage boys, it's harder and harder to get across the message of trying to control the type of game, and there are horrible games out there.
Oh yeah, I mean that's.
But a big part of that is probably best dealt with by communication. That really you're 17, you want that game. Do you ever worry about how God sees that? That's a communication you can't have unless you've said it's now time for you to make those decisions yourself.
And then buckle up and be on for the ride, right? And you're going to go through the 20-somethings, and there's going to be bumps in the road because of that. Ken and Jessica, thank you so much for being with us the last couple of days. It's been great. And turning to the listener, the viewer, I'm telling you, as a personal testimony, Gene and I used this content from Dr. Ken Wilgus, Feeding the Mouth That Bites You, and a couple of good phone calls that we had with him. And it really worked. It was amazing, particularly how Trent just turned back toward us emotionally. It was a game changer. And I just so believe in this content. I want to get a copy of Ken's book into your hands. If you can make a gift of any amount, we'll send it to you as our way of saying thank you for being part of the ministry. If you could do it monthly, that's great. One-time gift is good. And we'll send it as our way of saying thank you for being part of the ministry and gaining some great insight in your parenting journey.
Yeah, support the work of Focus on the Family as we come alongside parents like you, literally parents around the world. Our number is 800, the letter A in the word family, or you can donate generously online, and we've got the link in the program description. On behalf of the entire team, thanks for joining us today for Focus on the Family with Jim Daly. I'm John Fuller, inviting you back as we once again help you and your family thrive in Christ.